Hello, hello. If you are here for the webinar, Giving a Great Client Experience, you've made it to the right place. So we have some people coming in. Barb, great to see you. And Jim, Kathleen. This is a free webinar put on by the B2BWI Writing Institute, where we help you become the writer they want to hire. And I'm the founder, Sarah Griesenbach, and I've been in freelancing in the B2B space since about 2013. And being a career writer might seem like it's all about the writing, but in a decade of doing my own business, of watching thousands of other writers launch businesses, I can tell you without a doubt, it is not about the writing. Because great writers can have really terrible businesses, and mildly okay writers can have really great businesses if they make it fun to work with them. So, but fun for a client or a boss is going to be different than fun for you and me. Fun means clear expectations, clear boundaries, hitting deadlines, being pleasant to talk to on the phone. So fun for clients is something that we have to learn. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We get to hear from 4 freelancers about how they make it fun to work with them. So systems, processes, communicating with clients, we're going to go down a rabbit hole. So just a few technical notes. First, I'm going to be in the chat. So I'll be sharing links to help you learn more about who's talking. Please don't be shy. This is just a bunch of curious writers interested in client experience. I can guarantee you, if you have a question, someone who's more shy than you is wishing that they could ask that question. So just go for it. Just ask that question. So pop your questions in there and I'll save them for the Q&A with each person. And second, this is extremely flexible. So there will be a replay. Feel free to pop in and out if you've got other stuff going on. All of us here speaking have different weird things around us, and there might be children or pets or lots of wild things. Thank you so much for joining us.
I, like Sarah mentioned, am Adrienne Smith, and I am talking with you today about the pre-client experience. So how you can translate a positive client experience to the people that you're pitching, and how you can show versus tell what it would be like to work with them by going through your pitching process. So before we dive into the topic, I want to introduce myself a little bit more. I am an independent content strategist with 12 years of experience in content strategy. I primarily help B2B SaaS companies, so software as a service companies, with their brand messaging, their content strategy, and their content creation. I also have found that I so love talking about content strategy with my peers that I've also started offering resources to help freelance writers and freelance content strategists really level up into offering content strategy services so that they can increase their revenue without necessarily working more. So I have a free email course on that. I have some toolkits on that help offer content strategies, and I have a work in progress workshop also. We're starting with a basic question here, just food for thought, right? What is a good customer experience? I know that this is the topic of the whole reason we're all here today, and there are so many different answers to this question that all lead to a good customer experience. The lens through which I want to think about this for my talk is a good customer experience is a reflection of your values or our values. When you think about the experience that you want to offer to prospects or the experience that you want to offer to clients, think about what you value in yourself and think about your strengths. What are your strengths as a freelance writer or a freelance content strategist that just have to do with how you work with the client, how you represent yourself, how you show up every day? For example, these are mine, right? So my values are collaboration, openness, and ownership. I really like a collaborative experience with my clients versus a more kind of formal, I give you this final presentation at the end of my work, or I give you this final, it's less formal. And I like to work with my clients at every step of the process. For instance, when writing, I like to work with them on an outline and get them aligned on the approach. I like to have feedback that is very thoughtful and not super formal. I also like to be really open. I like to communicate openly and give honest feedback, even if that means that I'm pushing back on a client. And then I also like to really take ownership of the work I do. I have a lot of pride in being responsive and proactive, right? So those are mine, just for examples. And just to toot my own horn for a second, these are some testimonials that clients have said that have actually reflected those values. So when I'm thinking about the client experience or the prospect experience, and I'm thinking about how I can be collaborative, open, and really show ownership over my responsibilities, I like to check back in when I'm done working with a client or getting testimonials from them and make sure that those testimonials are lining up with my values, right? The reason I wanted to show these is because these testimonials and these values could just as easily apply to the process of pitching and securing a client as they apply to working with a client. So you can be collaborative and thoughtful when you're pitching a client. You can bring an open mind instead of one way of doing things. And you can be really clear, proactive, responsive, etc., and take ownership over your side of the process. Again, just my values, which moves into tip 1 before we even get to how to apply that to the pitching process. Tip 1 here is to just think about what your values are. Likely you're already showcasing them in your working relationships and in your day-to-day. You probably already have them instilled within you. And if you haven't already thought about what those values are, just do some thinking about your strengths and the feedback that you hear from clients about what's so great about working with you, and think about what values are reflected in those. I'm just realizing I don't have the chat pulled up, so let me pull this up just so that I can see what people are saying too. Okay, good. Awesome. Okay. So when I talk about showcasing your values to a positive client experience, I'm just going to call it the client experience, even though it's a prospect experience technically. But when you're showcasing your values and delivering a good client experience in the pitching process, I like to think of it as very broadly falling into these 2 chunks. And these are the 2 chunks that I'm going to discuss today: discovery and the proposal stage, right? So the discovery stage is most often, in my experience, represented as a listening call to learn pain points, needs, and budget from the prospective client. And the proposal stage is where I try and define what the scope of work is, what the fee for the project is, and what the timeline is. It should be said that when I am going through these 2 phases, I am trying as hard as possible to deliver this positive experience and get a really clear scope of work for as little time as possible, right? No one wants to spend a ton of time working for free on a long and lengthy pitching process. So that's just a caveat to keep in mind, that this all comes with the thinking of how can we do this with minimal time. Discovery and proposal stage, how can we deliver that positive experience in each of them? My goals in the discovery stage, which usually showcases itself as a call, right? A quick call, maybe a 30-minute call. The biggest thing that I can impart here is that this is not the place to sell yourself. This is the place to listen, learn, and then once you've learned enough, identify if there's a fit. So I'm going to walk through what that means. When you're learning, I'm really trying to get 3 things out of the discovery call, and I always have the potential client go first. I want to understand their pain points. So this is most often learned by asking something like, what has worked and what hasn't worked so far with your content marketing or with your writing or with your ebooks or something like that? What has worked and what hasn't worked? And so everyone does this. They often jump right to what hasn't worked and they really dive into that. And it's a very helpful opening question. So that's learning about pain points. I'm also trying to learn about their needs. So it's a pretty natural follow-up to that pain points question. What are you hoping a consultant like me can help you with, right? Why do you think you need help with those pain points? And what do you need help with? And when you're learning for that question, I think it's important to remember that sometimes potential clients don't come to you with very clear scope, right? I want X, Y, and Z by this date. But they still can say, I'm hoping that you can help me figure something out, or help me explore what type of content we should create, or explore what type of gated content we should create, or something like that. And so even if they don't have a very strict answer or a very focused answer, it's still a worthwhile conversation to understand what they're hoping you can bring to the table. And then budget is the third thing I try and learn. And this could probably be a 2-hour call in its own, but I do try and always ask for what their budget is. I will say I rarely, except with the golden prospective clients, I rarely get a clear-cut answer. Oh, our budget is this amount. And so I usually follow up with a question that gives them some things to react to. So I'll say, okay, would you say this is a $500 project, a $5,000 project, or a $20,000 project? And then they immediately have something to react to. And so that's a trick that I use to learn their budget. Then once I have learned pain points, needs, and budget, that's when I introduce myself. And I really actually try to only introduce myself after they've even passed it over to me. I really try not to jump too quickly into talking about myself. And my slant is usually more about where there's a fit and how I can help based on what they've talked about. And it's a little bit less on, here's all the things I do. And so this call is more about identifying the fit than it is about me selling myself. So here are your tips for conducting a discovery call that kind of reflects those things we just talked about. Some of them might seem pretty simple, but I think that they're really important. Don't interrupt, right? I had spoken about this through the lens of don't jump into talking about yourself too soon. Wait until they pass it over to you. Don't interrupt and change the topic. Really let them go through their full trains of thought. Being an active listener in terms of nodding, smiling, This is a personal preference. I like to take written notes instead of typing notes, because even if they know that you're taking notes, there's just something about being on a virtual call with someone typing that to me feels like they're not paying attention or they're answering emails or something. And so I try and take written notes. And then once they've finished a point, so if I've asked them about their pain points and they've finished their point, I try and do two things. I paraphrase and summarize, or I clarify what they're saying. And then I ask a follow-up question if one is applicable. So I do like to say, okay, so you are looking to do this thing by this date, but you're not sure whether you need X or Y. So what do you think about blah, blah, blah? And then I move into the question. I'm going to move on to the next part, which is the proposal stage. Ooh, what I'm hearing is, that's great, Sarah. Love that.
So I can interrupt at any time. I'm just trying to restrain myself from doing it. But this is just a kindness to everybody. If we could just all screenshot this slide, because I think we feel this pressure to be professional, which there's a lot of argument even over that term lately. But when we say be professional, this is the kind of stuff that we're thinking. It can be as simple as just don't get on and defensively start explaining how much writing work you've done. That kind of stuff feels instinctual to us, but what they're looking for is the listening. This stuff that we take for granted is very powerful. Just to repeat what someone has said, sometimes word for word.
Yep.
Makes people feel heard. It really does.
It's so true. And it brings up a nuance to this, which is that you may be doing less talking on this call than you would expect in an intro call or a discovery call. You might think that in order to present a good client experience off the bat, you need to present yourself. But you do that by listening, not by sharing. You share, but when it's targeted and when you know how you're a fit towards the end. I would say if I really had to be prescriptive with this, I would guess that I'm talking for about 8 minutes of a discovery call or less.
That feels right to me. And if I'm talking more, that's a sign it didn't go well. So
yeah,
reflecting on it, and I'm like, wait a second, they asked me a bunch of questions and I just talked the whole time. Then I know I'm probably not going to get.
Yeah.
I'll hush now.
No, that's great. Okay, so we're moving on to the proposal stage. where you're more formally pitching, right? So you've learned about their pain points, their challenges, and their budget. You have enough to run with some ideas, right? And the really critical thing, if I can have you leave with one nugget of information here, I would hope that this is what it is. The critical thing is to pivot from presenting them with one option that puts them in a position of asking, okay, yes or no, should I work with Adrienne? Move them towards reviewing a few options, ideally 3, that immediately bypasses the question, yes or no, should I work with Adrienne, and moves it to which of these options is best for me. So they're skipping yes or no, and they're moving right into which option is best for me, or which option should I buy. I have found this has really revolutionized my pitching process. It has also delivered such a better client experience because it immediately pulls in the prospective client into being a partner and a collaborator. I am not presenting them with one thing to react to, again, to react yes or no to. I am pulling them in and saying, which of these options feels right? Which one would work best for you? Okay, now that we've decided on the direction, let's flesh it out together. I'm seeing some awesome chats here. Cool. So this is tip number 3, to collaborate on the scope, right? This is not something after the discovery call for you to take your information, go off on your own, pull together one formal proposal with the final fee, the final scope, et cetera, and present it to them. This is your chance to write an outline first, basically. And so what I like to do personally is I try to always do 3. I think that the power of 3 is really important. And I try to give 3 directions with 3 things. A loose scope. So I usually just give a few sentences on the value of that option and some of the key deliverables, but I try and present options and I try and keep it broad. We're going to conduct research that could be via interviews or reading through reports. I give a budget range. I don't give a fee yet. And I try and have the budgets for my 3 options fall into some really nice Goldilocks pricing, which I'll get into in a second. And I give timeline ranges. Again, I don't have enough information yet to provide a fee or provide a timeline. I'm just trying to understand which of the 3 directions they would like to go with. I am going to pull up something that I have found really helpful here. So if any of you have heard of Jonathan Stark, he has a great podcast and some great resources for building a business of authority, which means a business based on your smarts. And he has a page here with some helpful formulas for pricing 3 options, right? So if you want to go a little riskier and you really want to drive your price up and experiment, play with this ratio. If you want to play it a little safer, play with this ratio. And if you're charging hourly, but you're trying to transition, play with this ratio. Sarah, I'll send you this link so we can include it in any show notes or something if we want. So once I've given the client, the prospective client, these 3 directions, again, we're immediately collaborators, right? Because my question is, which of these feel best to you? Not, do you want to do this? And I like to present these on calls rather than over emails. Even though a call adds 30 minutes, I find that it actually saves time in the long run over waiting to hear back over email and going back and forth to have some clarity. So I do personally prefer a 30-minute call, and we have a chance to, his podcast, The Business of Authority with Rochelle Moulton is amazing. And then we have a chance to brainstorm. Okay, which direction feels best? What would you want to change? Do you want to pull in elements of option 3 to option number 2, which is often what I see happen. We end up combining 2 options. Does this fee range feel good? Do you feel like there's wiggle room? Is it too high, et cetera? If it's too high, what can we remove from the scope? And so we end up collaborating, and they leave the call with knowing that my next step is, okay, let me build a proposal that reflects what we talked about. And then I'm not even pitching them a proposal that they haven't really seen before. I'm just sending them a follow-up that says this is a reflection of what we discussed, right? No surprises. Okay. Those are my 3 tips for delivering a good client experience before you even have your client signed, sealed, and delivered. So decide on your values and think about how you can reflect those when you're working with a prospective client during the discovery phase. My first tip is to conduct active listening during that phase, and then how you can reflect those values when you're drafting up your proposed scope. And my kind of 3 options to improve collaboration are my tip for that.
Magnificent.
Cool.
Well, I love with the final tip, something that's happening that you didn't call out directly, but that very strategically is happening, is they're building it with you and saying yes along the way. Because if you're asking
Exactly.
questions, is it one of these 3 options? And they tell you which options appeal to them, that's them not saying no. If they're not interested at all, they're going to say, or they're not going to write back A.
Yep.
B, they're going to say, no, thank you. We'll table. This isn't a priority now, things like that. But you're getting these signs all along the way that this is something they want. And that takes just everything you said, the insecurity and the fear and the doubt out of you as you're building this. It's wonderful. Any questions for Adrienne? In the chat is up. And then let me pull up my list because I always have questions pop up in mind. Man, how do you, I'm going to go first. And then if there's any questions, I'll interrupt myself. Being strong enough to be silent, how do you not talk if you really want to talk? Like maybe your thing is being nervous and you're going to talk. How can you work around that?
Yeah, I am such an interrupter in my real life that this is hard for me. My tactical tip that I personally do is I write down my thoughts in a separate spot in my notebook, just on the side of the page, so that I don't forget them while I'm listening, but I don't have to jump in with them immediately, which I actually also think is a sign of is demonstrating your thinking and your professionalism to be able to hold a thought and refer back to it. So I try and write them down while I'm listening, and then honestly, sometimes the prospect answers some of those things or speaks to them already. And then I can really, by the end of their turn, if you will, point out the 1 or 2 things that I wanted to like circle back to.
I dig it. And Matthew asks, does this model of relationship building have parallels with other areas of life? I think that's a leading question.
I would imagine. I think having clarity on your values applies to anything. And I do actually, this is probably not perfectly answering the question, but I do think that you can showcase different values in different parts of your life, right? Like I'm trying to be collaborative and open, and I already forget the third one that I had said, collaborative, open, and responsive, and have ownership. I try and do that professionally, but I might have complementary but different values in my personal life.
Yeah, I was going to say this 1, 2, 3, this is actually really good marriage advice.
Yeah, that's true.
Relationship, conduct active listening, collaborate on the scope. It all applies. It's as if boundaries and expectations.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong process. Cool. If that is all from the crew, just hit reply on any email that you get if a question comes up while you're looking at the replay and stuff. But this has been really helpful. Thank you, Adrienne. That does bring us to an end, and this has been exciting. And I think my takeaway, just the word listen, I feel like all of us have said that at least 4 times, which is very true and accurate. But what I'm really thinking is there's no respected freelance writer role that you can just apply for and then you get it and then everyone else does this work for you, like with the job. It's going to be very rare. I have yet to see one where they're actually going to pay you well and they're going to have great processes and they're going to just let you do the writing part. You have to make that role for yourself. And that is scary, but you get to. This is your invitation to actually think of how you want to work and start to take small steps to put that together and create the role that you want and the processes that you want. And I love that everybody here has done that for themselves and incorporated listening and values and all this really cool stuff. So cool. So thank you guys for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.